If you are elected during your term, America will likely enter its second decade of war in Afghanistan. Do you believe our nation and our current administration is on the right track or on the wrong track relative to the war? And what leadership would you bring as our U.S. representative on this matter?
Years ago, I voted against the war in Iraq, and I persistently pushed to bring our troops home from that misbegotten conflict. And one reason I did that was because I thought that the tasks that we were confronting in Afghanistan were being relegated to the back burner. Now we find ourselves, President Obama kept his promise, we're out of combat operations in Iraq, but we have a lingering commitment in Afghanistan. I want to bring that commitment to an orderly and responsible close, and the timetable that the President has projected next summer to bring those troops home in an orderly fashion, I think that sounds about right. We do have interests in that area. Afghanistan and Pakistan need to be stable. They need to have legitimate governance. They need not be hotbeds of terrorism. Nuclear weapons have to be safe. But our engagement, I'm engaged there with the parliaments, for example, as chairman of the House Democracy Partnership. It's extremely important to have positive relationships that strengthen that country's governance. But this is not mainly a military task, and it is extremely important to serve notice to all concerned that our military commitment is not open-ended, that we expect the Afghans and the Pakistanis to govern and defend themselves, and that our troops will be on the way home in a time certain.
Dr. Lawson, you have 90 seconds.
So we went over to Afghanistan to hunt down and punish Osama bin Laden. That was the original reason for going to Afghanistan. And if someone comes and vandalizes your house, you don't turn around and go tell that person, hey, can I remodel your house? We are not having our military in Afghanistan act in the way it's supposed to be acting, in defense of American lives. We are on a nation-building exercise that is putting our men and women in uniform at risk, not making us safer, and every dollar we spend over there is being borrowed from the future. I had an emotional conversation with a retired U.S. Army Special Forces veteran at the Cary VFW a few weeks ago, who was telling me of his most recent tour in Afghanistan, which he started in 2008 at the age of 61. He was so committed to protecting the lives of our young men and women in uniform. And what he told me was the distaste and the disgust he felt at bringing duffel bags of cash to Afghan warlords to protect our supply lines. The warlords then gave that money to the Taliban, who took the money to Pakistan to buy blasting caps, plastic explosives, guns, ammunition, the very weapons that are being used against our troops. That's not protecting our troops, it's not protecting our country, and it is leading us to bankruptcy. I will work to remove our troops from Afghanistan as soon as possible, in contrast to my opponent, who voted against the resolution that would have done just that earlier this session.
Again, can we just not clap? Thanks. Congressman Price, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
The truth of the matter, as my opponent well knows, is that I voted for a resolution to tighten up the exit strategy and to demand that of the administration. That's the fact. It's also a fact that his position on this, and of course there are lots of things wrong in Afghanistan and Pakistan that need to be addressed, but they need to be, in the long term, addressed by the Afghans and Pakistanis themselves. But his position is part and parcel of a position that would require us to withdraw from the United Nations, would send those troops, bring them home, and send them down to the Mexican border.
Thank you, Congressman.
Militarize the border. That's a great idea.
As our nation tries to emerge from the deepest economic downturn since the Great Depression, what should the federal government do through spending, incentives, and/or tax policies to induce job creation and to encourage a return to normalcy and growth? And has the additional national debt from the stimulus package been an appropriate price or too high a price to pay for the results that we have seen?
The federal spending, the federal gains, and the increase in the national debt have further pushed us on a road towards national insolvency. We are not going to get anywhere with this economic situation until we recognize what got us into this problem. This problem, this economic crisis, is created by too much debt. Instead of letting nature take its course letting bankruptcies occur, letting honest capitalism prevail, we have decided to bail out the people who built this edifice of debt, to reward failure, and let Wall Street pay out 1% of our GDP in bonuses in 2009, while our local community banks are unable to make loans and are yanking credit lines and are putting people right in our communities out of business. We have to get our federal government back into the business of assuring a level playing field in our financial system. Our financial system is a monopoly. It must be regulated, and we cannot tolerate the irresponsibility such as was exhibited by Mr. Price by voting to repeal Glass-Steagall, thus setting the stage for this massive debt bubble and the speculation by our largest money center banks. That is the kind of crony capitalism that is driving businesses out of the country, that is causing capital to flee our shores, and is preventing us from getting back on a road to sustainable economic growth. Honest capitalism is where people do well by doing good. The way we can do that is by vastly simplifying the tax code, ideally by eliminating it and replacing it with a uniform progressive consumption tax like the fair tax, but at the very least, keep capital in our communities so it's available for us to create our own businesses and our own jobs and stop punishing honest capitalism.
Thank you, Dr. Lawson. Congressman Price, you have 90 seconds.
My opponent and I were on a TV taping yesterday, and within the space, I think, of 2 minutes, he was wringing his hands about the federal debt, just like you just heard, and then he was advocating policies that would add $700 billion to that national debt in the next 10 years without batting an eye. Well, as a matter of fact, that's a lot of what's wrong with our politics. Too much smoke and mirrors around the federal budget. We, in fact, finally cut through that. We, in fact, finally cut through that in the 1990s. We balanced our budget. We paid off $400 billion of the national debt. And then, within weeks of the new administration, $2 trillion in tax cuts, not paid for. A prescription drug plan under Medicare, not paid for. 2 wars off budget with borrowed money. So yes, we came into an economic downturn in a dangerous position of weakness. Now, when you're in an economic downturn of this severity, the worst since the Great Depression, of course you have to do some things to get out of it. And some of those cost money in the short term. You have no choice. But we must never, never let ourselves be in that position of weakness again. So we need to encourage businesses to invest, create that good business climate, to invest, to hire, to come back. And there are many examples around here now that's beginning to happen. We certainly shouldn't abandon the things that have made us strong in terms of public education and infrastructure and research. And we need to never go into that kind of debt that will leave us exposed in this way again.
Thank you, Congressman Price. As a reminder for the supporters of both candidates, we're asking that we hold applause until the end of the debate. Dr. Lawson, you have 30 seconds to respond.
With respect, Mr. Price, you just argued against the federal spending you've been approving for the past 22 years. It's Congress's job to fund the budgets and to decide where money gets spent. We have been spending way too much money. What I said on the TV show that will air over the weekend is that we don't have a taxing problem, we have a spending problem. We need our federal government to require less tribute. We could find $700 billion to bail out Wall Street. Now it seems we're having trouble leaving $700 billion in our local communities to grow our own jobs and businesses.